Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Supercoach, mates. Well, round 8 is done and dusted, and the last time I was here, St Kilda and Collingwood were in the top two spots, and I think they pretty much still are. So, um, both our sides are still flying, so we're obviously both happy about that. So this podcast, what we're gonna do pretty much our normal stuff. So we're just gonna talk about a few verses, do some overrated, underrated stuff, and then I'm gonna have my segment at the end where I'm gonna let loose on a couple of sides who've been really disappointing and a player. But before we get into that, we're just gonna do a really sort of quick skim over our side. So I'm actually gonna start off. So hopefully you guys can all see that. Um, so I have the 22 trades left, and I've pretty much just about got what I would say is a pre-buy finish side. There's obviously, a couple more spots to upgrade. I've obviously got a forward left. I've probably got. I'd like to keep Ashcroft and get rid of Baker. And the back line, I think Chincotta and Atkins, who I think we're going to talk about a bit later on, I think those two guys are both here to stay in their respective sides. So, as far as I see it, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. Obviously, still having the 22 trades with pretty much what I would say is a full side outside of a couple of rookies here and there. I think is in a really good spot to be in. Obviously, not having Dawson and English is hurting at the minute. So I think what I'm going to do with those two, I think I'm just going to hold out till the buy now. I don't think there's any point trying to get them in. And then I'm hoping that they can both drop in price a little bit, and then I think they'll be right to pick up around the buy. So obviously I've already done my trades provisionally this week. So I think this is a week to jump on Clayton Oliver. I don't think he's going to get any cheaper than what he is. The only issue I have is if Finn McGuinness comes back in and goes to him as a tag. But even then, I think they sort of, last time they played, they went after Langdon. So, but yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with where this side sits at the minute. So, that's all I have to say about my side. How about your side, Thomas? How's your side going?
Yeah, I think I'm fair. What are you ranked at the moment, Nathan? Just out of curiosity.
I am ranked 25,000.
Yeah, so I think me, Nathan, Jonas all copped a pretty average start season with X, Y, and Z reasons. I had a terrible. I think I was ranked 40,000 to start with, which was a bit rough. I've had to make series granted them now. Where am I? I don't have the visuals on board, but yeah, 22,000. So I still went up a couple thousand, even though I had a bit of a dodgy captaincy selection in Sinclair. But I know Nathan does the visuals with my side, but I've got, if I read them out quickly, Dacos, Sinclair, Zeeble, Sicily, and McKenna and Chincotta. Basically, McKenna's going to have a heavily featuring my plans for trades this week. Bontempelli,
Fair enough.
Yeah, Bontempelli, Dawson, Laird, Dunkley, Green, Day, Hopper, Ashcroft in the midfield. Ashcroft's the next one to go. With that, obviously, my main aim is to bring in defenders. Not defenders, midfielders now on in. With how I'm going with, obviously Dunkley and Dawson in the midfield. Rucks, Darcy and Marshall would love to have English, but I think Darcy's just tracking along nicely at the moment, even though he had a pretty poor game on the weekend, which we'll touch on later in the episode. But yeah, Taranto, Rosie, Caniglio, Goulden, Sheasel and Chandler. I mean, you have no reason to get rid of Sheasel at the moment with the way he's going.
No.
I know he had a poor game a couple of weeks ago. He scored a 50, but he's scored 110 this week, and he's just tracking along nicely. No Aaron Hall in the side definitely helped this week. And Chandler and Samson Ryan on the bench alongside Fergus Green. So definitely a positive. With not too many rookies on field, and the rookies that are on field at least can score half decently. It was a bit frustrating because I had the opportunity to get Oliver, but decided against it. Went hard with my last boost to try and catch up some ground. So means I'm a bit skinny on trades with 17 left, but I'm pretty confident I can get to a full side with the money I've got on the bench, which with Samson Ryan definitely helping with his 100. But we'll get into that later with some of the decisions I think players have got. We'll talk about Rory Atkins. He's heavily in my trade radar this week on the bubble, and he's someone I think that could be worthwhile looking at. And we'll give our reasons why. But yeah, we'll move swiftly along to our versus part of the segment, Nathan.
Yeah. So first one here. So Sam Doherty obviously started off the year as one of the most expensive defenders, but through form and role, he just hasn't really, I guess, shown the heights that he has the last few years, but he was sort of back to his best with 111. And Will Powell, now he's someone who's sort of a bit flown under the radar a bit. So what do we think about these two, Thomas? Who are you leaning towards here?
Look, I was a Doherty owner. I've loved the bloke ever since he started the season. He's one of my favourites, non-St Kilda. He played pretty well on the weekend. He played that quarterback role as usual, pushing to the guts, and probably just scored as normal. There was nothing different in the way he was playing that suggests otherwise. And, you know, whether it would be consistency moving forward, I think the big plus with him is he's coming at a significantly discounted price. I don't hate the power pick, to be fair. He's just dominating at the moment down back at the Suns. He's a big reason why the Suns are keeping in touch most weeks. They'll probably stiff to lose against the D's last week or this weekend just gone. The only issue is I guess, you know, you're arguably paying less for Doherty at the moment than for Powell. And Powell, I know, had a 140 in there in the last couple of weeks, and he's just, a real instigator off halfback. But there's big question marks on whether he can keep up, and I'm pretty sure that he's had a few injury concerns. So I guess if I was to force to pick, I know I like the Powell pick as a bit of a unique pick, but I think you just stick with Doherty. If you were to pick between the two, they're similarly priced. And I think with the runs on the board, and Doherty is a big reason when he does well, Carlton usually do okay. But they'll need him to fire if they have any chance of making September. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go Doherty all the way because I think Will Powell will be this year's George Hewitt for me, someone who I get in and then he just flops once I get him in. So I think I know what I'm going to get with Doherty. But yeah, I will just give a quick shout out to Powell because he has been really, really good this year for Gold Coast. They seem to be getting the ball in his hands quite a bit off that back line. But yeah, I think when you've got Doherty, who's nearly 20k cheaper with a break even of 71, I think that might be too hard to pass up as opposed to Powell, whose break even's 51, but he's already gone up 100k. So I don't really like picking people knowing that they've already gone up a heap of money. I'd rather pick someone who's perhaps fallen or, you know, had a bit of a bad run with form and sort of hope that they can turn it back around. So yeah, I will agree with you here and go with Doherty for this one. Next one here, Noah Anderson and Clayton Oliver. So Anderson, bit of a breakout year for Anderson. I know he sort of shot to fame with that goal against Richmond last year, but I think it's the scoring power and the consistency with him this year. And obviously Clayton Oliver, you know what you're going to get with him week in, week out. So where are you leaning towards, Thomas, for this one?
I mean, Anderson, if you predicted it 2 weeks ago, I know a lot of us were basically suggesting that Matt Rao was the one that would benefit most from Miller, but it seems like Anderson's just hit the next level. He's gone 144 and 189, so two huge scores, which if you predicted 2 weeks ago, you'd be laughing because you basically made yourself 100k in the space of 2 weeks and essentially even premium in the rate he's going. Unfortunately, I think with him, it's more of a consistency thing, and obviously you got to keep in mind when Miller comes back, how does that impact him as well? I wouldn't probably bring him in. I think he's over 600. Don't change.
Yes, he is. He's 605.
Yeah, and you're paying 50k more for Oliver. So if you can afford Anderson, I think you're probably best to try and fork out 50k extra if you're able to get Oliver. His break even is just under 100. So they play the Hawks. Does Nash potentially go to Oliver? Who knows? But Oliver's likely to still score above 100. Anyway, and I think he's just capable. He's just so safe. If you're slim pickings for vice captains, he's your number one on the list to just pencil in a VCC every day of the week alongside Bontempelli. But what are your thoughts, Nathan?
Yeah, well, I think my side already decided this argument because I have paid the money for Oliver. I know that Oliver's probably going to be a top 2, top 3 midfielder for the year. And while Anderson, I think, could be a top 8, I feel like if I wanted him, I would have got him before he had the 140 against Richmond. So, yeah, again, a bit like the Will Powell pick. If you had have told me, a fortnight ago that he was going to, pretty much go up 60k and have a break even of 9, yeah, I would have jumped on them. But I think just where my side is, I think I just need to try and get the best players in. So I've taken a bit of a risk and I've got rid of Hopper this week for Oliver. So I might have gone a bit early on Hopper, and then for that reason alone, I think you just want to pay and get the best player you can. I've already got Bont, so yeah, Oliver's the next line in rung. So yeah, I'm happy to back Oliver in all the way. I still think Anderson will, he could keep up this form, and I'm happy to wear that. But yeah, I think from my perspective, I think Melbourne are gonna win a lot of games, and I think Oliver's gonna be front row centre. So yeah, for that reason, I am leaning towards Clayton Oliver with this one.
Yeah.
Max Gawn and Sean Darcy. So Gawn 130. I can't believe he's low 500s. That just seems outrageous for someone of Max Gawn's caliber. But then again, he has been injured. And Sean Darcy, who's I feel like just going, like he sort of looks like he's going to string a few 150 games together, and then he just sort of has a quieter game, and he sort of doesn't really go up or down in price. So, yeah, where are you leaning towards this one, Thomas?
Obviously, yeah, two different scenarios. One is a trade in, one's a trade out. Gawn, if he had forward DPP for whatever reason, he'd be handy. But I think unless you have, I mean, hypothetically speaking, we'll talk. When Marshall was injured his ankle late, but he seems okay to play. If he was one that was a longer term injury, Gawn be an immediate swap, and don't worry about it. But I don't think there's any reason for you to bring in Gawn unless you running a lower, a unique ruckman or a rookie ruckman for whatever reason. As a Darcy owner, there is an option to go from Darcy to Gawn and basically bank yourself 100k. So it's a tough one. I mean, Darcy's form has been a bit questionable, but as I said in the write-up, that will be released to Patreon later this week. He did play against Ned Reeves, who has a habit of mitigating ruckman quite well, and they brought in Lloyd Meek, who used to play with Darcy. So they would have done their due diligence on how Darcy works, and he was on like 20 and a half time and ended up on 77, so he had a huge third quarter, and he plays Laddams on the weekend, on next round, against Sydney. So he could go big again. So it's a risky business going Gawn because they did have even hit-outs between Gawn and Grundy. So it was his work around the ground that really got his score up. It wasn't necessarily his hit-outs. I don't think that's something you can rely on too much with Grundy in the side as well. But what are your thoughts, Nathan? Aren't you a Darcy owner yourself? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm a Darcy owner, and I think I'm going to keep backing in Darcy. But I guess this is a problem with these two ruckmen because they've got such good second rucks in Grundy and Jackson behind them. I feel like that they're just going to ebb and flow throughout the year. So I think it's Darcy's turn to be the higher one. So I think he might have a few down weeks, and then Gorn will pick up, and he'll have a few down weeks. Grundy will get on top. So, I think if you've got Darcy, I don't see any reason to get rid of him. I think if you do, I think Tim English is the way to go for the extra 40k. I probably wouldn't be going down to Gorn, especially if you've already got Rowan Marshall or someone. However, if you have English and Darcy, it could be a cash gen just to get a quick 100k that goes elsewhere. But I'm not in a position to do that given that I don't have English already. So, I think with Darcy, I think you just persist with him, and he's 611k, so he's gone up 50k on his starting price. I think I'm gonna pick Darcy out of these two just because I think Gawn might spend more time forward. I have seen that. I think he's gonna, out of the two with Grundy and Gawn, I think he's the one that's most likely to be the sort of the key forward. So I think even though Gawn's hit out at the minute, I think are about 60 to 65%. I think that'll flip with Grundy as the season goes on. So I think for these two, I think I would be leaning towards Darcy out of these two. Adam Chera and Andrew Brayshaw. So obviously Andrew Brayshaw was one of the top scorers from Supercoach last year, and Adam Chera sort of had a bit of a breakout year in the Carlton side, who we'll touch on them later. So where are you leaning towards here, Thomas? Because I feel like this is a bit of an interesting one, these two.
So just bringing up Adam Chera's stats quickly. It's interesting because, Brayshaw was touted to be Mr. Consistent this year. He's price above 600, but he just really didn't hit the ground running for whatever reason. This is the first time we've seen him go absolutely berserk, and what kind of owners were hoping for from the start of the season. Granted, it was against Hawthorn. I don't think he got much attention from anyone. He kind of just went on his way. But that's kind of the stat line that we should normally expect from Brayshaw. Chera's an interesting one because he's one that, if you look at how he's gone this season, was priced about 500k now. Obviously, first 4 rounds weren't amazing, and you'd be questioning why you bring him in. But I don't know what's happened at the Blues, but ever since round 5, he's gone 106, 144, 134, 132, and it's really the last 3 weeks where he's just gone bang, bang, bang. I think the positive with Chera is you just don't have to worry about a tag issue. It'll go to Walsh or Cripps. And if one of those guys get mitigated, Chera just is off the chain. He gets disposals. He's quite, his tackle pressure's elite. Having said that, he's close to 600k. I don't know how he can maintain this kind of form. Obviously, they need him and the rest of the Blues midfield to score well for them to do well. But I think for 70k less, you'd rather risk it on Brayshaw, who, having said he hasn't had the best start of the season, he's been a bit of a roller coaster. I think you'd expect him to kind of rise with Freo. They have that win against Hawks, which I think was much needed. And I think moving forward, he'll bounce back and really kind of rocket through into the second half of the season. He's a fitness beast, and I think his kind of stamina across the whole season will start to flourish in the second half. But what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm Brayshaw all the way here. I think it was a bit banged up coming into the season, from what I've been hearing out from the Perth media. So I think he'd be almost my second pick behind Clayton Oliver this week in the midfield. I reckon. I reckon if Clayton Oliver's break even wasn't below 100, I reckon I'd just about be bringing him in at 530k and banking on him, Brayshaw. So yeah, look, Chera, he's had a really good block of games, but I feel like the Carlton midfield themselves, something's got to change in there. Hewitt's been a bit down. Cripps, hasn't had the same influence this year. Sam Walsh is, just doing Sam Walsh things. So I think there's room for improvement in the rest of the Carlton midfield around Chera. So because of that, I think Brayshaw will be my pick out of these two. And it is just interesting to note that as Brayshaw's gotten sort of his form back a bit, Caleb Sarong's scoring sort of come down a little bit.
Yeah, he didn't score as well, but he still scored okay, but definitely not.
Yeah. So I still think that Fremantle's best midfielder is Brayshaw, even though Sarong's had a really hot start to the year.
Yeah.
So maybe this is just something to keep in mind going forward in future years. We know this with Jack Steele and Tom Mitchell, who we discussed pre-season, that there are some midfielders who do get off to quite slow starts. So those two I said are ones, so Mitchell and Jack Steele are ones that do sort of start off a bit slow, and they do tend to drop 50, 100K on their starting price. And then as the season gets deeper, their form completely changes and they become popular sort of options in that mid 500K range. So maybe this is just something to keep in mind with Brayshaw, that it doesn't really matter what they do at the start of the year. It's ultimately what they do at the back end of the year. And if this is what Brayshaw is going to be like, well, he's someone to pencil in going forward. Because I think if he gets on one of these scoring runs like he had last year, I think you're going to want to have him in your side at that price. So, yeah, I think Brayshaw wins this one quite hands out and comfortably.
Yeah.
So, moving on. So, Josh Weedle and Roy Atkins. So, Weedle, I think, was a really popular pick in the preseason and then wasn't picked for round one.
Yeah.
And he's sort of been playing the VFL since, but he's got his run the last couple of weeks. And Roy Atkins is a bit more of a mature ager who I think's just had a really bad run with injury and form. So where are you leaning towards in this one, Thomas?
I think it's an interesting conversation because obviously it would be a lot easier if Atkins was like 123K, be him all day. As long as he gets selected. But Weddle or Weedle, I don't know how you pronounce it.
I think it's Weedle.
Weedle. I don't exactly know where he's been. I think he's been playing in the back half. Look, his first game wasn't anything to flash by. He scored a lot better this. He was more consistent this game. However, he's in that kind of category of your McElhaney's and all that who just don't get enough of the ball to warrant a big enough score. I don't know how long he'll last on the Hawthorn side, but you'd assume for a little bit considering they're kind of blooding youth. Atkins is, obviously Weedle's 130K and Atkins is 206K or something like that. Just over
200K, just over.
The big positive, I think, from that game in particular against the D's is he scored decently. He scored a lot better in Dream Team as well, or AFL Fantasy. So he just didn't use the ball as well in this game. But he also took kickouts, which is a big plus in this game. He took 5. He split it with Powell. So if he's taking kickouts as well, you can kind of bank a couple points there, and it kind of gives you a bit of peace of mind. Obviously, it depends on your structure. So if you're relying on one of these to be in your field, you kind of want Atkins. I think his scoring is just going to be better in general. Weddle's just going to be a slow burn. But if you're kind of at the back end of that stage where you just need a downgrade rookie, you don't really care if they're on their bench or not, Weddle's probably your guy. It gives you another 100 or 70K to work with. But what are your thoughts on these two? I mean, I think you brought in Atkins this week.
Yeah, well, I'm unfortunately with my backline and how I've structured sort of my trade situation this year, I feel like the backline, there's sort of some really good options as opposed to the forward line. So obviously my main priority was to try and get the forward rookies off the field because there just wasn't many of them. Whereas in the back line, I'm a little bit more confident. Sheasel's now down there. Wilmot and McKenna have been really good. So there've been a few good defensive rookies down there. But in my position, because I've only got the 3 big boys down there in Dacos, Sicily, and Tom Stewart, I kind of need that player on the field, especially because I've managed. Well, I shouldn't say I've managed, but I've held Charlie Constable in the hopes that he can get back into that Gold Coast side, and I'm still holding out hope that Wagner can get just another run for Freo, and then I could move them on. But I'm not optimistic on both of them. So I think in my case, I think it's got to be the Atkins one, because I think as long as he stays healthy and in form, I feel like he's going to maintain his spot in that Gold Coast side. So yeah, whereas Weddle, obviously young kid first year, they quite often happens with this. They come in, they sort of have a 6-week block, and then they sort of go back again into the VFL. So yeah, I think because of that, I think Atkins is definitely the clear cut one. So yeah, I'm happy to pay the extra 100 or the extra 70 odd K to go to Atkins as opposed to bringing in Weedle and clogging up another spot on the bench.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
All right.
Well, we'll move on to our overrated, underrated series. Now, the first question I have for you, Nathan, is we've obviously touched on these two before, but what are your thoughts on bringing in players who are known to score well? Obviously, Brayshaw and Doherty were kind of the top liners of last year. They've now crashed and burned, and they're now at really low prices. Doherty will be at 500 or basically 500k. Brayshaw's at 530. Do you reckon it's an overrated, underrated statement in saying that these players are kind of your no-brainers, just get them in at a much discounted price and hope they kind of score as well as they did last year?
Yeah, so I think this is, I don't know, like this is kind of a tricky one, because if you've had Doherty all year, or you've had Brayshaw all year, like you sort of would want to be in the camp of getting rid of them. But if you haven't got them, like they're probably players who you would want to get because you sort of know what they're gonna do. In saying that though, you would want to see it a little bit more consistently before you definitely jumped on. But I'm just gonna say purely underrated because you know what you're gonna get from them. But there is a word of warning there that I think it was Brodie Smith about 5 or so years ago who was priced at like 500k, had 2 concussions in about 4 weeks, and everyone held him and he just plummeted in price. I think by the time most people got rid of him, I think it was mid 300k. So I can't see that happening with these two, but it is just a word of I guess caution that when you're picking up these guys, they're down at that price for a reason, and that's either because they're coming back from injury or their form hasn't been good. But yes, I do think I would rather trust these guys as opposed to picking up, say, a Matt Rowell who's just gone on a tear the last few weeks. Because I think these guys in the long run will be more sustainable.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Moving on to the next one. If Nathan,
just let me get it up.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, this one's an interesting one because obviously with rookies being slim and far pickings when we're talking about Rory Atkins as a potential option. This is a bit of an out there statement, but what are your thoughts on bringing in players who started off at rookies? Let me just quickly get this up. But Matred Owens, I think, was 220k.
Yeah, he was something around there.
Jack Buckley was 200k. These are pretty much the 2 best rookie kind of options you could have started at the round 1, which a lot of people didn't. But if I just read you their stat lines, Buckley hasn't gone under 70 once. And in the last 3 games, he's gone 87, 91, 99 with a price at 419 and a break even of 48. Owens, on the other hand, has had some huge scores. Also hasn't gone below 70, and he's hit 2 scores above 100. With one being 143, and then obviously this week was 88. What are your thoughts on bringing in these players with the potential to go, I'll keep it in mind that they're going to be a keeper, but worst comes to worst, I can obviously flick them on a bit easier if you've got trades in the bank as well? Or do you think their ceiling, because obviously Owens is a bit different to Buckley, but their just ceiling is not high enough to warrant a keeper selection because of, they're obviously rookie starting prices. Overrated, underrated?
Yeah, so this is actually an interesting question, and that question, I guess, purely from my perspective, I think it depends on the position that the players are eligible for. So in my case, I think Jack Buckley, I think this is an overrated statement because I think there's more better value at his in his position in the back line. And also at 419k, it doesn't really leave you a lot of, I guess, wiggle room with trades. And I think at this stage in the season, I think the trades become more important than their cash value. But Owens is a little bit different in that he's a forward, and there doesn't seem to be as many consistent forward options as opposed to the back line. So for me personally, I think this statement is overrated for both of them because I just can't bring in someone who's, 200k above their starting price. In saying that, though, I think out of the two, the most likely one I would be to bring in would be Owens, and that's purely because of his position on the field being in the forward line.
Yeah.
But Buckley, I think it's definitely way too late for Buckley. And Owens, look, it's probably too late as well, but I think Owens I would be bringing ahead of Buckley just purely because of position. But to purely answer the question, I think it's overrated to bring them in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think you'd be laughing if you brought in either one or both. In comparison to some of the other rookies we've started, even an Ashcroft hasn't lit the world on fire, and everyone brought him in. So, yeah, I mean, if you brought him in at 200k, these 90 scores are ridiculously good. Owens will be an interesting one. I do agree that it is an overrated statement, but if you were to bring one, it'd be Owens. Mainly because it'd be interesting to see how he goes this week. If we do get King and or Caminiti back in, he basically now plays, rather than a second key tall, he now plays as almost a third or fourth key tall and a chop out ruckman. So it will really depend on how he goes in that role. Because if he's able to increase his disposals because he's pushing much higher up the ground and score one or two goals, I could see his score has been a lot higher more consistently. But moving on to our last.
Just quickly, he's currently the 11th highest ranked forward for the year. So. Yeah. He'd be in the next run of players down in terms of his season so far, Owen. So, yeah, that, as I said, that's the only thing I would say about Owens is that he is sort of up there for the forward. But Jack Buckley, I doubt Jack Buckley would be anywhere near the top 10 or 20 defenders. So, yeah.
Anyway, moving on to our third and final one, which is obviously umpire / AFL related. It's obviously a hot topic of discussion with the amount of umpire debates we get, obviously on social media and on AFL news as well. But with the introduction of 4 umpires in comparison to 3, there's been a lot more discussion and debate about the consistency and the kind of effectiveness of this change in umpiring. What are your thoughts, Nathan, on this ruling? And do you think it's a overrated, underrated statement to kind of keep this 4 umpire structure and just see how it goes for the rest of the season? Or do you think it's been that bad for XYZ reason that they need to restructure it and either go back to 3 umpires or just change it up again?
Well, when we first were told about this 4 umpire system, I think a lot of people thought that it would let the best umpires be able to umpire more than one game a week. And that's sort of how it was sold to everyone. But I don't think that's been happening. I still think the umpires are only getting one game a week. So I'm actually going to say that this statement currently is overrated. And that's purely because obviously the umpires a lot of them are new, and unfortunately, obviously, as we're seeing with the umpire dissent and all these crackdowns and stuff, there are umpires leaving the game. So the AFL want to try and do everything to protect their umpires, but at the same time, if it's going to dilute the quality of and consistency of the decisions, because instead of having, say, the rookie umpires, doing the VFL games or stuff like that, where they can gain sort of that experience, if they're getting flung straight up into an AFL environment where every decision you make is under more pressure, every decision that you make can be open to scrutiny from the media, as opposed to the VFL where or a waffle or something like that, where there basically is no media scrutiny at all. I just feel like that the umpires this year seem to be making weird and inconsistent decisions, which hasn't happened previously. So, like, I'll just quickly touch on. So, the Collingwood Adelaide game in the last couple of minutes with Nathan Murphy getting clotheslined and then getting the goalie pinged for deliberate despite the doctor being on the field. I think if we had the 3 umpire system, I would doubt that would happen, because I don't know who was controlling that, but my hunch is that it was probably a young and inexperienced umpire who was controlling that. And they simply just froze. And it got alluded to on Monday with, not sure how many of you listened to David King and Jared Waitley on Monday Means Test, but the umpires basically just froze in the last 2 minutes of that game. So the other thing I want to highlight too, and there was actually some great vision highlighted to this on First Crack, that the positioning of the umpires is a bit out of whack with what the AFL are trying to do. So if you go and have a look at the at a few games on the weekend, the sides want to hit that 45 targets. So they want to basically get the ball from the boundary line and they want to try and hit that 45 targets straight into the midfield. Well, the way the umpires are standing is they're basically standing right on that 45 line, which is cutting off sides from actually getting the ball into the corridor, which is not allowing that fast, exciting football. And it almost cost Sydney dearly on Sunday, because they had the chance to do that. And Cullen Mills got impeded by the umpire, who was basically about on that 45 degree, basically about 70 metres out from Collingwood's goal. Now, it's lucky that Sydney didn't pay the price for it. But, yeah, I think this is a massive discussion point, is the quality and also the positioning of the 4th umpires, in that it feels like the field has been clogged up a little bit more. So at this stage, I'm going to say it's overrated, but I definitely think that with extra coaching and just a slight tweak in the positioning change of those umpires, that this statement can very quickly become underrated, because I'm not one to bag the umpires. They have a really hard job. And just like the players, they all make mistakes as well. They all have off days. So, yeah, but obviously, unfortunately, being a professional sport, they are going to get scrutinised more than what the bad players will, even though it's not fair on them. They're just out doing their job. So, yeah, I think with a couple of little tweaks with how they're coached and how they're positioned, I definitely think this statement can change. But at this stage, I'm going to say that it's overrated and that something needs to change.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you, Nathan. I think you nailed it on the head with multiple examples and scenarios. It almost feels like there's almost too many cooks in the kitchen kind of scenario, where they're over umpiring it. It is one regards, but I believe it was Joyce on the Saints TV podcast that may have mentioned this, that he noticed, I think, one of the situations where there was a decision made, and you could hear that the umpire furthest away was telling the umpire close to call it holding the ball, and then the one closer didn't actually agree. So I think you're right in saying that there's inconsistencies with regards to the nature of the inexperienced umpires and more experienced umpires having to coach those almost on field. But if you're kind of making bad decisions based off that, I think that's the inconsistency you got to get rid of. And the more umpires you have on field, the more inconsistencies you're going to get naturally going to have because you're going to have one extra opinion on field. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and I think, as you said, one that probably gets ironed out as the season goes on. But,
yeah, and they would want to fix this up come the finals, because if this cost sides finals matches, there's going to be even more scrutiny. But you would hope that by finals that they've got the best set of umpires across the year, who are doing most, if not all, of the finals. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. But yeah, my biggest fear is that it's going to cost the side dearly in the final.
Yeah.
With these umpiring inconsistencies and where they're standing.
Yeah. Anyway, to finish off, I know Nathan was away last week, but he's fired up and doubled down on this week's version.
Fired up. There we go.
But I'll let you give the dice on this one, and yeah, Roland, you've obviously got 2 weeks worth. Don't go too hard as Nathan Murphy, but off you go.
Right, now, I feel like I'm bashing up on Carlton here, but the fact that your fans were booing your own side, I think, says enough. Now, I'm not a booer. I don't agree with it. I know that it happens, but I think your own fans are saying enough about the way that you're playing that I don't need to comment on it anymore. Other than something needs to drastically change. Otherwise, I heard someone actually, it's funny, I heard someone today on the radio say that Michael Voss has got 4 more weeks left as Carlton coach. Now, if you're I would say that Carlton should be a top 4 side this year, given that list. And if you're already talking about sacking your coach, that's a really bad sign. So, for Carlton's sake, given the fact that their draw is really, really tricky as well, they've got the Bulldogs, and then they've got Collingwood, Sydney, Melbourne, and Essendon before their bye. And obviously they got Gold Coast as well, but not going to count Gold Coast. But yeah, those are really, really tricky games. And if Carlton want to play the way that they do, there's no way that they're going to be beating a Collingwood on the MCG, because then the next side I'm going to talk about too is the Sydney Swans. And I know Sydney are banged up with injuries, but I don't know what they were thinking trying to play this slow possession style. It was never going to work. Now, the only caveat I will say on that is that they did kick 1 goal 7 from set shots. So if they fix their set shots, then who knows what could have happened. But for Carlton, they should be looking at that Sydney game and going, well, Sydney have tried this and it didn't work by playing that uncontested chipmark style, because basically the reason why I think they played it was to try and take Collingwood's pressure and run them ragged a bit. Well, it didn't work anyway. So for Carlton's sake, something needs to drastically change. Otherwise, this season's just going to go to waste. And before they make the finals again, they're going to sack another coach, and then they're going to be on the rebuild again, and then the cycle just never ends. So I think right now, the old Carlton, well, no, not the old Carlton, but the Carlton president will be looking pretty stupid now, given the fact that they could have had Ross Lyon and they said to him that you still have to go through the process that everyone else is. And St Kilda now are third on the ladder with the best defence in the league, and they've lost their 2 games by a combined 13 points. So, yeah, I think for Carlton, I think enough I've said on Carlton. And the Sydney Swans, now I know Sydney are a bit injured, so I will give them a cop out there. But one place where they don't have injuries is in their forward line. And what is going on with the Sydney Swans forward line? It's all at sea. Isaac Heaney looks a shadow of himself. Buddy Franklin, I think, is starting to show his age. He's still getting targeted more than any other Sydney Swans player, which 36 years of age is a massive concern. I know there have been talks about whether or not Sydney are a better side without him. Now, that's not a statement that I agree with, because I think what Franklin does is he takes 2 or 3 defenders away, but I just watched them just butcher ball after ball after ball going inside 50 on Sunday, and I don't know what's happened though. Last year this wasn't an issue. Their forward line was arguably better than Geelong's forward line last year, especially in the back end of the year. And their ball transition was, I think it was second only to Richmond in like the last 6 weeks of the season. So I don't know what's going on at Sydney at the minute, but to be 3 and 5, I think is massive unders. Now I know that they've had 2 losses to Port Adelaide and GWS, but if you actually go back through, they've given up more goals from forward 50, defensive 50 stoppages than any other side. So in other words, they've given up the most points from an opposition forward 50 that's resulted directly in a goal. And when you do that stuff, you sort of start losing, I guess, a bit of trust in your teammates. So I think Sydney, if there's one club that I'm never going to write off, it's the Sydney Swans, because I know what their culture's all about. It's all about togetherness and whatnot, but something is seriously amiss there at the minute. And right now, to be 11th with that side, I think is a massive indictment. And for those of you who know me and listen, I did actually predict preseason that I thought Sydney might actually miss the 8 entirely, given that history says that when you get smashed in the grand final, you traditionally don't do well the next season. So maybe for Sydney, maybe this is a year that they have to have just off the grand final. Perhaps it was, a year or two too early. But yeah, I think for Sydney to be in this position that they're in now, I think is a massive problem for them. And I think for players like Franklin, who, went up to Sydney and had big expectations, I think if they don't win a flag with him, I think that deal's a failure. And, I think they'll get chances going forward. But yeah, this season is slipping away fast. And while I've quickly got my rant going here, Lachie Neale, I had him in 2 weeks ago when it looked like he just gave up and let Ward tackle him to the ground. But another 63 points against Carlton or whatever it was is not good enough, Lachie. And I'm only giving you an excuse because Dunkley was everywhere, and the fact that Carlton are actually the number one side to restrict midfielders from a Supercoach perspective. So that's your only cop-out. But Lachie, it's a bit concerning for you, my friend, that I brought you in a month ago and you've been in my nags twice already. So lift your game. Otherwise, you might be on the chopping block, and that will be if I have to chop you out, you will be on the never again list. And that's my rant for the week.
Well, I think Nate's going to blow a fuse if Neil gets sub 100 again this week. Who are they playing?
They are playing
Essendon
in Brisbane. Now, let's not forget, actually, I just want to cast your mind back. Let's not forget that Essendon actually beat Brisbane in Brisbane last year. But I think Brisbane were missing about 12 players through COVID, and even then it only took Essendon in like the last 2 minutes to kick away. I'm expecting a big response from Brisbane this week, and I'm expecting a big response from Lachie Neale as well. And yeah, I'm hoping that he's back up over 100. Otherwise, he's going to be in the nags again, and he's going to be on the verge of being a rage trade.
Yeah, that is understandable. Anyway, we'll leave Nathan to call his Jets for another week. And, that's all we have for today. And good luck to you.
I'm going red in the face.
Good luck to your respective sides this week. And hopefully your trades are successful. We'll catch you next week.